Nobody saw this coming. Nobody could have prepared for it. And nobody who was inside that facility when everything fell apart will ever forget what they witnessed. In what is already being described as the single darkest and most catastrophic day in the entire modern history of Japanese baseball, Samurai Japan has been torn apart from the inside in a manner so sudden, so violent, and so deeply shocking that the entire sport is still struggling to fully process the reality of what has occurred. 2 NPB players have been handed 2-year suspensions that have effectively ended their involvement in this tournament and cast enormous uncertainty over their entire professional futures. Kenucondo, one of the most beloved and respected figures in the entire Samurai Japan squad, broke down completely and left the team facility in tears, unable to hold back the overwhelming weight of everything crashing down around him. And then came the moment that has stopped the entire baseball world dead in its tracks. Shohei Ohtani, the man who has carried Japanese baseball on his shoulders with more grace, more brilliance, and more quiet dignity than any player in the history of the sport, reached his absolute breaking point. He took his uniform, the uniform of Samurai Japan, and he crushed it in his hands with a force that spoke of pure, uncontrollable emotion. And then he threw it in the trash. The room fell completely silent. And then Otani turned to face manager Hiroki Ibata and delivered a final statement so powerful, so raw, and so devastating that Ibata's face reportedly drained of all color in an instant. Those present described the manager as appearing physically shaken, a man who had suddenly come face to face with a truth so confronting that his body responded before his mind could even process the words. Samurai Japan has collapsed. And today we are going to tell you exactly how it happened, why it happened, and what it means for the future of everything Japanese baseball holds dear. To understand the full magnitude of what happened, it is important to first acknowledge that the collapse of Samurai Japan did not arrive without warning. The signs had been there for anyone willing to look honestly and clearly at what was unfolding within this squad over the course of the tournament. The performances on the field had been inconsistent in ways that troubled even the most optimistic supporters of the team. Key players who were expected to be performing at their absolute peak had repeatedly fallen short of the standard demanded by international competition at this level. The batting lineup, assembled with such enormous excitement and expectation, had produced flashes of brilliance surrounded by long stretches of frustrating mediocrity. And behind the scenes, according to sources close to the team, tensions had been quietly building for weeks. There were whispers of disagreements over tactical decisions. There were reports of frustration among certain players regarding their roles and their usage within the lineup. There were concerns about the team's internal communication and about whether the collective spirit that defines the very best versions of Samurai Japan was truly present within this particular group at this particular moment. Nobody wanted to say these things out loud. Nobody wanted to be the person who looked at one of the most talented squads Japan had ever assembled and suggested that something fundamental was broken beneath the surface. But something was, and on the day that everything finally collapsed, the full and terrible extent of that reality was exposed for the entire world to see. The first devastating blow came with the announcement of 2-year suspensions for 2 NPB players whose names had been considered integral to Samurai Japan's plans and preparations throughout this tournament. The suspensions, handed down by NPB officials following a thorough and serious investigation, relate to conduct that officials described as fundamentally incompatible with the values and standards expected of players representing their nation on the world stage. The investigation had been ongoing for several days, conducted quietly and carefully behind the scenes while the team continued to compete, and while most observers remained completely unaware of its existence. When the findings were finally presented to NPB leadership and the decision to impose 2-year suspensions was formally confirmed, the news was delivered to the players concerned privately before being communicated to the wider squad and then released publicly. And the manner in which the rest of the Samurai Japan players received that news, the shock, the disbelief, the anger, and the deep sense of betrayal, set the emotional tone for everything that followed throughout that devastating day. For the 2 players themselves, the consequences are enormous and potentially permanent in their impact. 2 years away from professional competition at this level represents a sentence that will test every aspect of their physical conditioning, their mental resilience, and their fundamental commitment to the sport. Whether either of them will return to anything close to their previous levels of performance remains deeply uncertain. For Samurai Japan as a collective, the loss of two contributors of this standing represents a tactical and psychological blow of the highest order. But as events would quickly demonstrate, the tactical consequences of the suspensions would turn out to be the least significant part of what this day had in store. Kondo has always been one of the most quietly important figures within the Samurai Japan environment. Not always the loudest voice in the room. Not always the player whose name dominates the headlines or whose performances generate the most dramatic reactions from the crowd. But someone whose presence, whose professionalism, and whose deep and genuine love for Japanese baseball has made him one of the most respected and cherished members of every squad he has ever been part of. Which is exactly why what happened to Kondo on this day was so painful and so difficult for everyone who witnessed it to process. Kondo had already been carrying the weight of a difficult tournament on his shoulders. His performances at the plate had fallen well short of the standard he sets for himself and that others have come to expect from him. His legendary on-base percentage, his exceptional bat control, his ability to read pitching and make contact to all areas of the field, none of it had shown up consistently in this competition. And the personal frustration of knowing that he was not delivering for his team when his team needed him most had clearly been taking a heavy emotional toll. When the full reality of everything happening around him, the suspensions, the atmosphere, the sense that something precious and important was being irreparably damaged, finally became too much to carry, Kondo broke. Those who were present described the moment as deeply moving and almost unbearably sad to witness. This was not a brief, passing expression of frustration that quickly passed. This was a man whose emotional reserves had finally been completely exhausted by the accumulated weight of personal disappointment and collective crisis. Tears came freely and without apology. And when it became clear that Kondo was in no state to remain within the team environment, arrangements were made for him to leave the facility. He walked out with tears still visible on his face, surrounded by a silence from his teammates that spoke more powerfully than any words could have managed. Several players reportedly watched him go with expressions of helpless sorrow. This was one of their own, someone they genuinely cared about, walking away broken. And there was nothing any of them could do to fix it. And then came Shohei Ohtani. Throughout everything that had unfolded during this long and devastating day, Otani had maintained the kind of controlled, focused composure that the baseball world has come to associate with him so completely that it can sometimes be easy to forget that beneath the extraordinary talent and the relentless professionalism, there is a human being with a genuine emotional core that can only absorb so much before it reaches its limit. On this day, Otani reached his limit. The precise sequence of events that pushed him to the moment that followed will be debated and discussed for years to come. Those present describe a gradual but unmistakable buildup of tension throughout the day, each new piece of devastating news adding another layer of pressure to a man who had been giving absolutely everything of himself to this tournament and to this team. The suspensions, Kondo's breakdown, the atmosphere of collapse and crisis spreading through every corner of the facility. All of it pressing down simultaneously on the man who has always been expected to carry more than his share. And then, in a moment that witnesses described as arriving with the sudden, overwhelming force of a dam finally breaking under impossible pressure, Otani grabbed his Samurai Japan uniform. He crushed it in his hands. The fabric twisted and crumpled under a grip charged with every ounce of frustration, anger, disappointment, and heartbreak that had been building inside him throughout this impossible day. And then, in a gesture so raw and so powerfully symbolic that everyone in that room felt it like a physical blow, he threw it in the trash. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even appeared to breathe. Because what they had just witnessed was not simply a man losing his composure in a moment of frustration. What they had witnessed was Shohei Ohtani, the embodiment of Samurai Japan, the greatest ambassador Japanese baseball has ever had, reaching a point of emotional and psychological exhaustion so complete that even he could no longer maintain the composure that has always defined him. It was the most shocking thing most of them had ever seen. But the moment that will truly be remembered, the moment that has already become the defining image of this entire catastrophic day, came next. Otani turned to face manager Hiroki Ibata, and he delivered a final statement. Those present have described what followed as one of the most powerful, most honest, and most devastating things ever spoken inside a professional baseball environment. While the precise words Otani used remain known only to those who were in that room, the substance of what he communicated has been described consistently by multiple sources. Otani told Ibata directly and without any softening or diplomatic cushioning exactly what he believed had gone wrong. He spoke about leadership. He spoke about preparation. He spoke about the standards he holds himself to every single day and the gap between those standards and what he had witnessed from the collective environment surrounding this team. He spoke about what it means to wear the uniform of Japan, the uniform he had just thrown in the trash, and what it means when that uniform stops feeling like something worth wearing. He spoke about the players who had let their country down, about the systems and decisions that had created an environment where that kind of failure became possible. And he spoke about his own pain, the genuine, deep personal pain of a man who loves Japanese baseball with every fiber of his being and who had been forced to watch it embarrass itself in front of the entire world. Every word landed with the weight of absolute truth. And as those words filled the room, witnesses watched the color drain completely from Ibata's face. The manager who had navigated so many difficult moments throughout his career stood before his greatest player and found himself without a single word of adequate response. Ibata turned pale. And in that moment of pale, speechless silence, the full extent of Samurai Japan's collapse was written on his face for everyone present to read clearly and completely. In the hours following these devastating events, NPB officials, team management, and senior figures within the Japanese baseball community have been engaged in urgent and intense discussions about the path forward. The questions being asked are enormous in their scope and deeply uncomfortable in their implications. How does a team recover from a day like this? How does an organization rebuild trust, restore confidence, and reconstruct the collective identity of a squad that has been so visibly and so completely torn apart? How does Japanese baseball look at everything that has happened and find within it the seeds of something better, something stronger, and something more worthy of the extraordinary tradition it is supposed to represent? These are not questions with easy answers. They are not questions that can be resolved in a single meeting or addressed through a single tactical adjustment. They require honest, difficult, and sustained work at every level of the organization. But they are questions that must be asked. And they are questions that must be answered with the same honesty, the same courage, and the same uncompromising commitment to excellence that Otani demonstrated when he stood before his manager and spoke his truth without flinching. This has been the darkest day in recent Japanese baseball history. 2 players suspended. A beloved teammate broken and in tears. The greatest player in the world pushed to a point of emotional exhaustion so complete that he destroyed the symbol of everything he has dedicated his career to representing. And a manager left pale and speechless before the most powerful statement any player has ever made to him. Samurai Japan has collapsed. But collapses, as painful and as devastating as they are not always the end of the story. Sometimes they are the moment that forces a team and an organization to finally face the truth about itself and begin the long, hard, necessary work of becoming something genuinely worthy of the name it carries. Whether Samurai Japan has the courage and the character to take that journey remains to be seen. But if there is one person in that squad capable of leading them through the darkness and back toward the light, it is Shohei Ohtani. Even on the day he threw his uniform in the trash, that much was never in any doubt. Thank you so much for watching. We want to hear your thoughts on everything that has happened. Please share your reactions in the comments section below. If you want to stay updated on every development in this story and all the latest news from the world of Japanese baseball, please subscribe to our channel and turn on your notifications so you never miss a single update.